Grandma left a fortune for her, but she wouldn't share with her sister. In general, being lied to is one of the worst things that people can do to you. Unfortunately, we live in a society where lying has become the norm. Everybody lies to everybody and there are not a lot of people that you can trust 100%. Thankfully family still exists, and for most people, their parents are the people that they can trust with everything. Well, that wasn't the case with the protagonist of our story. The lies she was told made her lost all trust in them. Grandparents are usually the softer parents. There are very few grandparents that can resist their granddaughter's wishes. This was the case for Amy. Amy was living with her parents, but most of the time she spent it with her grandmother since both of her parents had to work full-time to sustain her. Amy's life wasn't very conventional, but she had no problem with it. Mostly for one reason. She really loved her grandmother. They had a great relationship together, and Amy was having a great time. Some of her fondest memories were created together with her grandmother. She said later that they shared a special bond with her grandmother. For most adults, it's a dream to live with your grandmother. They give you a lot of sweets and do you all the favors you want. It's a dream come true. That dream was about to end suddenly. One fateful day Amy was playing outside in their yard as usual. She loved to dig in the ground and see all the various insects that lived there. For her, it was like a different world that existed right under her feet. Her grandmother always told her to be careful while digging stuff up, but she never stopped her from doing what she loves. Amy was lost in her world of insects and bugs so much that she would lose the track of time. And one day it happened. She went back into the house after long hours of digging and discovering without noticing that her hands were extremely dirty. Well, she had noticed, but her mind was focused on playing and seeing what type of bug she had discovered, so she didn't lose any time to clean her hands. She found her grandmother's books and tried to get the encyclopedia. Unfortunately, she touched one of her grandmother's favorite books. It was part of a collection that Amy's grandmother had started collecting when she was still young. When she realized what she had done, she got terrified. She knew how much her grandmother loved these books, and she thought she was going to be mad at her. Amy tried to hide the book so no one would find her. Although she knew that sooner or later it would be discovered. She felt very ashamed of what had happened, so when her parents picked her up they could understand that something was wrong. Her parents were very understanding of what had happened, and they understood that it was an honest mistake. They reassured her that she has nothing to worry about and that they were going to talk with her grandmother. Amy felt much better, but she had no idea that where this was going to lead. After a few days, Amy sat down with her parents and had a talk about what happened. They told her that they did whatever they could, but her grandmother didn't want to see her again. They said that she was very angry and there was nothing that they could do. Little Amy was shocked. It was the first time that someone is so harsh towards her. She didn't know what to do. Amy burst into tears, begging her parents to let her go see her grandmother by herself. She was going to ask for forgiveness, and she was sure that the grandmother that loved her so much wasn't going to say no. Her parents told her again that her grandmother made it very clear that she didn't want to see her again. Amy was devastated. It seemed crazy to her that for something so small she wouldn't talk to her. And it turns out it was crazy, but she would find out much later. After some time had passed, Amy and her new sister moved out of the city where they were staying until then, leaving her grandmother behind. Amy was feeling extremely bad, but her parents convinced her that they had to go. After all, she had her other grandmother that she could visit all she wanted. That's what they were saying, but what Amy was feeling was too complicated to express back then. She had a very unique connection with her grandmother that she was leaving behind. All the time they had to spend together made them very close to each other. It didn't feel right for her not to talk to her again. Unfortunately, she was too young to express any of these thoughts, so her parents just decided to pack up and go. Fast forward a few years in the future, and now we find Amy 22 years old, learning the horrible truth. It turns out that her parents completely lied to her. All the things that they told her about her grandmother getting angry and that it was her decision not to see her again were completely fabricated. There was a completely different story that was taking place without Amy realizing anything. When she found out the truth, she was furious at her parents and herself. All her life until then, she was wondering if she did the right thing leaving her grandmother. She was young back then and she couldn't have said no to her parents, but for a few years now she was an adult. She could have done what she wanted. She was thinking many times that she should go meet her beloved grandmother after all these years. She couldn't still be mad at her. It turns out she was never mad to begin with. Amy's parents used the story with the book to serve their own purposes. They had a completely different problem with her grandmother. A vendetta of their own due to a scandal that occurred. As we told you, Amy had a little sister. This little sister was the reason that these two parties fought with each other. since it turns out that she wasn't her real sister. Amy's mother had cheated on her husband and got pregnant. When Amy's father found out, he was furious. His first thoughts were to leave them, but he soon decided that he wanted to be close to his daughter. He was okay with raising the other child as his own. Then came the time to share this news with Amy's grandmother. She understood the situation and wanted to support the family. She said that she had no problem with taking care of both sisters under one condition. She didn't want to be there for the other child as a grandmother. She wasn't feeling comfortable being the grandmother of a child that is not her blood. That was the only rule she put. The family didn't take this well. They gave her an ultimatum. Either she would be the grandmother of both children or none. If she didn't agree to that, they were going to prevent her from seeing her granddaughter ever again. She thought that they were bluffing, so she didn't back down from her position. If someone was on the wrong, it was them. Plus, they knew that they wouldn't be so cruel to Amy, separating her from her grandmother. Turns out, she was wrong. The rest is, as they say, history. Obviously, when Amy found out the truth, she was angry at her parents. She moved out of their house 2 days later and decided to get into contact with her grandmother. After all these years of not seeing her, she was feeling guilty that she never contacted her. That was the moment for her to get back some of the lost time. But there wasn't much of it left. It turns out that her grandmother was very sick when they got into contact. She was very moved to hear her after so many years. She understood that it wasn't her fault for not contacting her. She could never be mad at her favorite grandchild. Amy and her spend her last months together, getting close again and creating the memories that they couldn't for all this time. Soon she passed away. Amy was devastated that she didn't have as much time as she wanted with her grandmother, and all because of her parents. She didn't know how to feel about them. There was no excuse for what they had done. They took away a person she loved without caring about the consequences. There was one last thing that they were going to surprise her with, and it wasn't a good surprise. Amy's grandmother left her some money. It wasn't a crazy amount, but for an unemployed university student, it was more than enough. It was enough to pay her student loans, get herself a second-hand car, and also have something left over. It was a great start to her life. She couldn't thank her grandmother enough. Her family had different intentions for that money. They wanted her to share them 50-50 with her sister. Amy was baffled. She couldn't believe the nerve that her parents had. Instead of asking for her forgiveness for everything they had done to her, they want her to give half of the money that her grandmother left to her alone to her sister. She knew all too well that this wasn't what her grandmother would have wanted. She wasn't going to do anything like that. I told them that just because they put themselves and my sister before me doesn't mean I have to put them before me too, and wasn't going to give her a cent. My parents are calling me petty and selfish, but given the circumstances, it's falling on deaf ears. Amy said. But there was another thing that was making Amy angry. Her parents thought that this story was something small. In fact, they had already put behind the whole thing a bit after moving out. They didn't even realize what they had done to Amy. Imagine what happens to a child that for all of its life thinks that her grandmother rejected her just because she did a small little mistake. It was the worst thing they could have done. This lie branded her forever. She spent her days thinking that if she ever did even the smallest mistake, people were going to stop loving her. She had to live every day scared that she could lose the people she loved at every moment. It was more than she could handle many times, giving her anxiety and making her emotionally unstable. And here comes the reason why she shared her story. She wanted to ask the people on the internet their opinion about her reaction. She wanted to be sure that she wasn't letting her emotions get the better of her. Was she being too harsh with her parents, or was she right to be mad at them? The people of the internet had nothing but support for Stance. It was the most logical reaction to something so horrible.